What's good, Tsla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, we'll break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm also going to talk about why Tesla and the overall market may see a bounce tomorrow based on what we're seeing from technicals and based on what's happening with the markets. So I'm going to talk about all of that, break down what's happening with all this data that just dropped, what you should be watching for over the next couple of days, and then talk about Tesla stock as a whole. But before I do anything like this, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I'm firstly not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends in just about 7 days, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. So, anyways, what's going on with Tesla? Why do I think that the whole market may see a bounce tomorrow? Why I think that's very probable, and why you have to be very careful when looking at the market because tomorrow is going to be the last day before CPI. So, for data that's dropping, there isn't really anything that's coming out that's too significant. We're not really seeing any big pieces of data, just like crude oil data and things like that. But then don't forget that tomorrow's Wednesday. It's going to be the last day before CPI comes out on Thursday. And CPI is going to come out 1 hour before the market opens. So your last chance to secure profits on positions and do things like that is going to be on Wednesday. Make sure you're prepared for this and make sure you're ready for what's about to happen. Now, looking at Tesla, instead of trying to like break out of its wedge, this thing actually just extended it. And if anything, it's just like trading sideways from here. So seeing Tesla extending this wedge, there's going to likely be a very big move tomorrow based off of this. And we will see if Tesla ends up breaking to the upside or the downside. My gut tells me it's most likely going to be the upside. I'm going to talk about that in just a couple more minutes. Let's first talk about some more pieces of data. Just as a reminder, we have some earnings coming out. We have Rivian and AMC and just a few others. For Wednesday, which is tomorrow, we have Roblox. We also have Sony and Disney. Disney's going to be the biggest earnings for the week, so make sure you're prepared for that. In terms of data, the reason why the stock market ended up selling off in the morning, in case you guys missed my early video, was because Moody has cut the ratings for 11 US banks. It's not just 10, it's actually 11. And that's because of the high interest rate environment. They're arguing that this may be very hard for the assets of these banks. And because of the fact that this environment is leading to a lot of individuals to not deposit as much money, which is once again slowing down the leverage of the banks. And they mentioned that this is the main reason why they're going to be cutting the ratings for them. And that is why the market ended up slowing down because sentiment is shifting once again against the banks. Now, when it comes to China, we had another negative piece of news. China has reported a double-digit plunge in the July exports and imports. This is particularly because of a slowdown in demand for now. And when things like this happen, this is just more negative news for different businesses out there, businesses involving the US and also Chinese tickers in particular. This is why we saw lots of Chinese stocks down from like Alibaba to NEO, and the list goes on. Hopefully, the market tries to rebound from this for tomorrow, and I will talk about that in just a few minutes. For Tesla's inventory tracker, I just want to mention that some good news has come out if this is truly correct, and that is the Model X inventories are dropping. We're seeing the same thing happening for every single model, as Tesla's seeing a big surge in sales. This could be because of the new tax credits that were announced just like about a week ago, and or other things like that. But for now, when it comes to news affecting Tesla, I didn't really see anything too big for the time being. I didn't really see anything too crazy. So hopefully this trend continues. There are sometimes instances where we see these big drops, which is good news for Tesla as sales are going up. Hopefully, sales maintain their high records for the time being, and this would be good news for Tesla. So far, so good. And then when it comes to Tesla's data, let me just mention that the latest analyst that came out was Morgan Stanley. They gave Tesla an equal weight rating, saying Tesla's going to perform equally with the markets. For the price pairs comparison right here, you can notice that this is still relatively high. It's not really that bad, and that's a good sign for Tesla. It still has some strength. It's not necessarily a weak stock. And compared to the market, the whole market came down off the bank news. This was bad news for the market. When the whole market came down, Tesla got dragged down as well. The market is like an anchor. It came down and dragged Tesla down with it, and that's why Tesla ended up dropping the way it did. There are possibly some remnants of what happened yesterday with Tesla's CFO that is affecting Tesla, but it's not really that bad. And I do believe if the market tries to bounce, this could help Tesla as well. And I think that's very probable for tomorrow. Now, in terms of seasonality, Wednesday is tomorrow. And Tesla tends to be green about 48 to 49% of the time. It's almost 50-50, so nothing too crazy. July's tend to be relatively weak months, and then August tends to be like 50-50 historically for Tesla. Now, the opposite happened. July was relatively strong for Tesla, and this August has been a little slow so far, but this could change depending on CPI and other factors. moving forward. But then don't forget that October/September tend to be a little bit weaker before a much stronger November and end of the year. So we could see a similar trend. I think that's still on the table, but this is going to depend a lot on CPI and other factors. Now, for hourly seasonality, the market, at least Tesla, tends to be stronger during like the third hour, also during like the fifth and sixth hours. This has changed a little bit since the last time I reported this. And Tesla is a little bit of a lagger. Sometimes it takes some time for this thing to run. So don't expect it to run immediately when you start to see like SPY running or even like the QQQ and the NASDAQ. It tends to be a little bit slower, a little bit delayed sometimes. So make sure you're prepared for that and you're ready in case something like that happens. Now, to add on to this, the short interest is starting to go up just a little bit. We saw about 30 million Tesla shares shorted the last time this came out. And the short volume relative to prices going up. We saw only 96 million in volume. Once again, not too bad, not too great either. And then the short volume I was talking about is still starting to go up, which is not the best of signs. This is part of why Tesla dropped from the last couple of days as this was increasing. But the question is, what about right now? How is Tesla going to move? Why do I think Tesla may bounce? I'm going to give you guys my answer in just a few minutes. All right, let's first talk about SPY. Then I'm going to talk about Tesla because you have to know something about SPY in order to understand Tesla and the whole market. Looking at SPY, let me just mention that this is looking quite decent so far. We saw this ascending wedge. I talked about this yesterday. This ascending wedge that was forming, and I told you all if it broke above the top resistance, we could have seen the market just bounce. If we broke below this, we would see a big rug pull. And what happened? As we opened, we gapped down, and that was our signal that the market would end up getting a rug pull. So much of this dropping happened during the pre-market. As soon as the market was ready for the pre-market, we saw the market slowing down. And then finally, we saw more selling today, which was expected in the morning. I warned you guys about this gap down here as well. Then the market rebounded. Now the market's trying to see this push to the upside, filling these big red bars and trying to, shift the overall flow and net volume. That's what the algorithms are after. And they were trying to push up because we saw a very big drop. So the market is kind of like a balance beam. If there's too much in one direction, we tend to see like the opposite, and the algos like to take over. But here's the thing about SPY that's going to be very good for Tesla. When you look at SPY, okay, notice something very big. When you zoom out of the charts on the 30 minutes time frame, even the 4-hour time frame, just a bunch of different time frames, you will notice something very good. We have this, divergence that ended up forming on in the 4-hour time frame, especially. When you look at the charts, the 4-hour is starting to shift in favor of the bulls a little bit more, just for now. Basically, the chart made a lower low on SPY. We can see this lower low was developed. SPY hit 445, but the RSI was uptrending, hitting a higher high. The MACD was doing the same thing. This is suggesting that we're going to see some upside. And then as a result, we saw the market bounce a little bit, and we're approaching this unfilled gap right about here. So we had some nice volume. Buyers stepped in the market, and I think there's a good chance that the market could either like gap down a little bit, start off a little slow, then make an attempt to push above 449. If we hold above 449, I'm expecting this gap to get filled around this 450 area. I think there's a good chance of a bounce for tomorrow for the market to hold up. I'm leaning more in that direction. We also have this like other imbalance up here around this like 451 area that could get filled too, but I think the odds greatly favor a 450 retest. And I think that we have a bullish divergence that is developed. And I think the odds favor the market trying to push up a bit and make its way up to about 450 from a technical standpoint. The 1-hour time frame on SPY is showing the same thing. When you zoom out, you will notice that actually I'm still technically seeing it right here. I mean, there is technically a bullish divergence because the price was, in this downtrend, whereas the RSI was on an uptrend. Same thing with the MACD. So it's not as like clear on the 1-hour as the 4-hour, but it still is relevant. And I think there's a good chance SPY is going to try to fill this gap and see 450 very soon. So that's the more bullish case. The bears are going to argue that it's going to come down to like, for example, below 448 to retest 447.5. And if that fails us, then more downside could come to the 446s. The bears will argue that, but I think that you should be prepared for anything, but I'm leaning more bullish. I think the odds favor the bulls will come out on top and try to push this market up. We had a very nice pump today, and I think we're going to see SPY try to fight for 449 and try to hold above that at the 50 EMA on the 1-hour time frame. And then I think it's going to try to fill this gap at 450. I'm leaning more in that direction. For Tesla, what do I think about Tesla? Well, here's the answer for Tesla. This is what you've been waiting for. So for Tesla, here's the thing. Tesla attempted to break out today. It wanted to break out, and it ended up failing to break out, get a really clean breakout. But if anything, it formed this wedge right over here. It formed this very, very nice looking wedge. Tesla's getting very, very tight right now, going back and forth and back and forth. So a big move should be coming very soon for the stock. Now, if we get bad news, Tesla could get a rug pull and come down to 247. If that fails, then 245 to 244 becomes a possibility. And if we get some really, really good news, right? Very, very good news could help this thing start pushing all the way up to fill this gap. And, with the whole market potentially bouncing, we could see Tesla go all the way up to the 250s. 2.5 is one possible target, if not 255. And I think that's very probable for Tesla, especially because of this imbalance right here. If we get a big breakout, 255 is on the table for tomorrow. Now, to add on to this, let me just mention that when you zoom out of the charts, uh, we had this channel that developed on Tesla, right? This really nice looking channel, and Tesla had a tendency of going back and forth and back and forth in this. We're still technically in this. And when we hit these very, very low levels, we tend to see Tesla try to bounce right back up. And I think it's very possible. And I'm leaning more in that direction. So I think, okay, always be prepared for both the bull and bear cases. Always be prepared for either of them, depending on which way we break and the news, right? I can't always predict the news for tomorrow. But based off this setup and based off SPY, I think the odds greatly favor Tesla filling this gap and going to 252.5, then potentially breaking that and trying to fill this imbalance for 255. I'm leaning more bullish for tomorrow, and I think Tesla may bounce for tomorrow right before CPI comes out for Thursday. All right, so that's the direction I'm leaning in for tomorrow. I also want to add that when you look at Tesla, it formed a bullish divergence right about here. I think it doesn't show as well on the 1 hour, but on the 4 hour time frame, it's more prevalent. So like right here, let me just double check this. So yeah, we technically have it right about here. If you look at the RSI, it started to uptrend quite nicely on the 4 hour time frame for Tesla. And if anything, it formed a higher high. The MACD sort of did this. It's trying to get this crossover on the PPO. If anything, it's just very, very tight. It hasn't really gotten much of a breakout. It's just super, super tight. It's just getting like very much compressed, and it really wants to break in one direction. My gut tells me it's going to try to be the upside. I think Tesla's going to fill this gap to 252.5, get a green day for tomorrow, and maybe see a test of like 255 or so. That's the direction I'm leaning in, and I'm leaning more towards that for other stocks as well. Looking at excuse me, sorry guys. Looking at Aapl, we're about to get a 4 hour PPO crossover on the MACD after this thing was very oversold. It dropped really, really hard in a short period of time, and now it's showing signs of strength, in my opinion, about to get a bullish cross on the MACD. It looks like it wants to see, in my opinion, at least 180. A hold above that than 182 is a possibility. So this PPO crossover would be the MACD in the signal line, once again, crossing. And I think we're going to see Aapl make an attempt for 182 for tomorrow. For the QQQ, the triple Q, if you look at the 200 EMA, it just tested this and got a nice bounce off of it. It also has a clean bullish divergence that is developed on the MACD and the RSI. I think it's going to try to fill this gap very soon, and we're going to be watching for a 374 retest. If it breaks 374, we can fill the gap to 375. I'm leaning more in that direction. For Nvidia stock, I think the same thing is existent. The thing about Nvidia is it does have a distributive structure right here, which is looking a little weaker. So we might see Nvidia gap down a little bit, but with the market pumping, we might see Nvidia try to follow in its footsteps and make its way up to about 450. The problem is that, which I just want to note, is that it's kind of like range bound. It has a tendency of being quite range bound. So we're going to be watching to see if Nvidia could make an attempt to rebound. So we have this like imbalance up here around this like 448 to 450 area. My gut tells me that we're going to be watching these levels carefully. Right now, it has 440 support, and 436 and 433. For resistance, you're going to be watching 450. If it holds above 444, that is. And then we have like 452.5, 455, and the list goes on. My guts tells me that as Nvidia is getting tighter, it's going to do something a little different for the short term. We're going to make an attempt to push up for about 450. And I think we have this imbalance up here, which is going to be where Nvidia tries to get to. It's not looking as strong as it did before, but there's a good chance of it making an attempt because of the whole market giving it some support. Now on Microsoft, we also formed a bullish divergence. I think on the 4 hour time frame it shows, I believe it's still showing. I think you could see it right here, this bullish divergence on Microsoft. So we might be seeing a small bounce on it for tomorrow. This thing has the potential to try to retest, in my opinion, like 328 and maybe try to fill this gap. I think there's a pre-market gap that's very small. Actually, I don't think it's still like unfilled, but I still could see 328 to 330 being tested. And I think Microsoft's going to try to get there. To add on to this, we have AMD. AMD currently is trying to hold up. It also formed it didn't really form any divergences, but it has a bearish cross on the PPO. It may gap down tomorrow and then try to bounce. I think the market pumping could help this thing make its way up to about 115 to 116, but I'm not really seeing anything too crazy from it. Looking at the NASDAQ as a whole, let me just mention that the Nasdaq has this unfilled gap up here. It may make an attempt once again to push to about 14,000, and as it came down, it got a nice bounce. And we might see this thing pump a little bit more to help tech pump, which could help Tesla and other stocks like that. On SPX, is the same thing. Unfilled gap is going to try to get a bounce after forming this bullish divergence right here. It's a little hard to see with this like time frame, but we did technically make a higher high on the RSI, despite the fact that there was a lower low on the price action. So the price made a lower low, the RSI made a higher low. We're about to get this crossover right here. And I think that this thing is going to try to hold above the 50 EMA, push up for this unfilled gap. And I think 4,500 is a real possibility. I think we're going to try to fill the gap and see a little bit of upside thanks to that. For the VIX, this thing came down to fill its gap. It still looks kind of bearish on the 4-hour time frame. I could be seeing this thing coming down to like the mid to low 15s. That could help the market pump a little bit. The dollar index is once again starting to downtrend a little bit. We're going to be watching this 102.3 area. I could see it dropping a little bit more, but we'll have to wait and see how it reacts to resistance and support. For Coinbase, it has a nice setup, formed a nice inverse head and shoulders structure right about here. We have this nice accumulation phase, and I'm going to be watching 90 to 91 as a target. I think it looks a little bit more bullish. Alibaba as well. It has earnings on Thursday, and it has this unfilled gap, formed a nice looking structure right about here. Is about to get a bullish cross on its PPO, bouncing off the 200 EMA. I think Alibaba may see an attempt to fill this gap, or at least get to like gap resistance. I could see 95 on it, and I think there could be a small bounce on it. 10-year treasury yield is actually, I'm not going to talk about that for now. I'm going to talk about Google first and then that. Let me just mention that the market is still in a decent place. If you look at Google, pretty nice looking structure, formed a very, very nice cup and handle like formation. We have this unfilled gap at 133. If it breaks 132, I'm going to be watching 133 flat basically to fill the gap. I'm leaning more in the direction of that happening, and it looks more bullish in my opinion. Now, if it breaks down, we have 130 as support and 129.5. My gut tells me that 133 is very possible. For the 10-year treasury yield, we're going to be watching this thing as it moves. We have a unfilled gap below and also one above. The current PPO on the 4 hours looking more bearish, so this looks like it may drop a little bit, which tends to be bullish for stocks. That's another bullish signal as possible, leaning a little bit more in that particular direction. And then to add on to all of this, looking at Amazon, I think my software just froze. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to reload my page. But anyways, when it comes to the market, guys, I just want to remind you one more thing. For the whole market and the way the market moves, it's very important that we look at the market from an unbiased structure. So I'm always open-minded. No matter which way the market is going, I'm always going to try to remain as open-minded as possible. And when I do that, I'm always going to be willing to look at both possibilities. That's why you have to look at support and resistance and to see what happens with any forms of confirmations or any breaks. But my gut tells me upside is still very possible before CPI. And I think that CPI is going to be very telling and tell us more about which way the market ends up going. So as far as Amazon goes, in my opinion, Amazon is still holding up quite decently. I think we're going to get a retest, maybe a gap down to like 138.5, then a bounce. Then we could come up to fill this gap. It hasn't fully filled yet. It came just under. So I could see 142 after that. So a small drop in 142. On Meta, I know someone in the comments mentioned that there's a possible inverse head and shoulders. I do see it right here. Also on the smaller time frame, on like the 30 minutes time frame, there's like a cup and handle that could be forming. So it looks a little bit more bullish, right? There's also this cup and handle on top of the inverse head and shoulders. Could see 314. We could also see 316. Those are two possibilities on Meta. I'm leaning more in the direction of those being tested. For support, watch 310 and 307. I'm leaning more in the direction of this thing popping for at least 316. All right, so that's what I see for the markets, guys. Thank you all so much for listening. Right now, technicals look like, and they're suggesting that upside could be coming for tomorrow. We're leaning more in that direction. Don't forget, the news is another factor that I can't always predict, so I'm not like a total, fortune teller that's always going to be right. But I can tell you that the odds favor upside for tomorrow, and I'm leaning more in that direction for Tesla. And I think we could see a nice bounce going into tomorrow. So that's what I'm leaning towards. So we're going to see what happens with CPI coming out for Thursday. With that said, I thank you all so much for listening. Have an absolutely spectacular rest of the day. Remain calm, cool, and collected. Tesla in the market to the moon as the long term is still very bright. And Peace out.